Wow, Frank, what an inspired entry. I just love the energy. I love the daringness of it and how you just throw yourself into it. There are a lot of very cool things here, and I just I think that your score. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. This is Muse score done with Muse sounds. I think this score shows as much as any other, or maybe even more than any other entry in this challenge, just how much Muse score has got to get its act together if they want to become like the most used, most convenient music notation app. I mean, I know that that's their goal, and there are a lot of people out there, including some university professors, who see that potential. They can see that like more and more of their students are using it. It's practically free. It's very easy to get into and everything else. But it's very unsophisticated in terms of those sounds. I mean, we could not see the beauty and potential of what Frank was trying to express in that mock-up. I mean, practically at all. Yeah, it sounded like circus music, and rather than the real heartfelt, soulful orchestral music that the score actually conveys here. Now, that's not to say that everything in this score is perfect, or that it doesn't need any work or anything like that. There are a lot of things that need a bit of adjusting and a bit of thought. Okay, but the mock-up did such a poor job here, and I don't mean that that is no slight on you, Frank. You did a great job here, but the mock-up is just, I'm just wondering what are they thinking, right? Whoever designed the Muse score thing, like, individual instruments have an interesting sound, but it doesn't add up together orchestrally, and especially not in fast, bright music like this, right? It just ends up sounding organ-like or Circus Calliope-like, right? Okay, so that is my rant, and listen, I really hope the Muse score people are listening to this, and I hope that they are going to not take my words as, being angry against them or as a knock on them. I want them to learn from, what we are seeing here, that somebody who has got some serious chops took a serious effort at orchestrating something and presenting something using their platform, and it just ended up falling short because of their deficiencies, right? Like Note Performer would never sound like that, right? I don't consider Note Performer to be the ultimate by any means, but like it would sound a zillion times better than this. Okay, all right. So now this is the first of our Movement 2 entries for the Dotted Brev Orchestration Challenge category. Now, we've had a few, like maybe, just a few scattered here and there across the different categories, the different Patreon categories, but we really haven't had a full-length movement yet. And so my approach to the criteria is going to be different from the way that it was before. What we are going to do is I'm going to use the evaluation criteria I use in the semi-brev level up to double C, the rehearsal mark double C. And then what we're going to do is analyze this as a rondo and go through its structure and look at each entry, each episode that is repeated, and analyze how it stacks up one to the other and how it develops the material and how it all ties together, and then we'll look at the coda at the end. Right? And I just think that that's the best way to do it, is just to break its structure down a little bit, and then we can really focus on the orchestration, right? Which is really, that's why we're here, right? So anyways, Frank, it's interesting how, like, this intro is almost like a, it's a bit of a mirror to the, dun 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 dun, that beautiful kind of opening introduction to the first movement. But instead it's just like, it's almost like, pratfalls, or just pulling fun, or being jolly or being mischievous, really. It's like another side of Beethoven, like in one sense there's the thoughtful side, the kind of the spiritual side, the storytelling side, and everything else. We see that in the first movement. And the second movement, it's really kind of more almost like his improvisatory kind of breakneck genius, like he made his bones in Vienna, if you want to put it that way. He made his reputation in Vienna by coming into town and playing all the other pianists in the town and then in the world under the table, right? He was able to take any theme, any idea, and just improvise the heck out of it, and do it in a way that he hadn't done before in a previous challenge. And he just created, if somebody had just been dropping into any of these contests between pianists where Beethoven was there, or just Beethoven playing extempore, right? Just like sitting down and making things up on the spot without necessarily challenging himself up against another pianist, but just improvising. He would have these concerts where he would just show up and, it would be almost like, improv theater. Hey, name a theme, any theme. And then you sit down and he would, he would play preludes, fugues, scherzos, and capriccios, on the theme, right? So I think that is the side of Beethoven we're seeing in this second movement. All right, it is his genius for improvisation and for and sort of the technical prowess. Like, this is like, to play this correctly takes a kind of pianism that's really at the height. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I was so thrilled that Spencer Myer gave his permission for us to use this, because he has that quality. I mean, he recently took on, was it the Chopin Impromptus, and he plays them and explains them, and he does, it's like, wow, yeah, this pianist is so good. But the thing is, like, why is he not at the top? It's just because there isn't, like, room up there. Like, there's room for, like, maybe 2 dozen pianists, right? And it's always sort of been that way, even when the world was a smaller place. So, Spencer is such a fantastic player, but his career has kind of been more about education, smaller concerts, things like that. So, but he expresses this. He plays it so beautifully, and he has, like, as he plays it, he has a knack for expressing the phrasing and the meaning and the subtleties. He doesn't just tear it off or tear through it, playing it, note perfectly, but not really saying anything, right? He says a lot, and he plays with technical brilliance. All right, so that is my introduction to the 6 entries that we're going to look at in this little group here at the end, before we go to the longa category, which is all first movement. And then when we go to the dotted longa category, which will be the last group of scores, we will see the full sonata orchestrated, movements 1 and 2, and that will be pretty amazing. And I want those releases to be a little bit more, I want them to come a little bit with, just not just like releasing them one day after another, which is fine. It keeps me on my toes, and it's great, and it builds up a wonderful momentum. But I'm going to be releasing those on weekends in November. All right, so everybody remember that. Put a pin in it. I'll probably make an announcement more formally when we get to the end of these dotted brev, the dotted brev releases. Okay, so now, all that aside, let's take a look at our evaluation criteria. Okay, and the first, our first concern is the shifts of dynamic. Do they imply contrasts of texture? All right. And, here you have chosen to go with that, and I think probably most orchestrators have. It's kind of an obvious thing. I'm not so sure that this, needs no slurring. This is a case where Beethoven has a slur across the dotted rhythm here. Da da da. And I think that da da is it's of course something with a percussive instrument like piano. It has less meaning than with a bowed instrument or a breath instrument. But like here, you've chosen to separate them, like in fact, very, very, very severely here, but then connected here. So if I could just advise you against that, Frank, especially in symphonic scoring like this, like where we are emulating a master symphonist, right? And the symphonist is concerned with having voices play together connecting together. The symphonic orchestra, according to, late Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, and then going on to Schumann and so on, Brahms, is like a fraternity, right? Or a brotherhood, or a, I'd like to go past like the kind of gendered descriptions to kind of like a collective of humanity, right? It's people working together to explore themes and to work through emotional states, right? Like the further along we go, we see, like with Shostakovich, for instance, listen to his fourth, right? It's like one of the most unjustly neglected symphonies ever, and was almost lost forever if it hadn't been resuscitated from its parts. There was a part, the score was lost, but there was a part set left over. Thank goodness. So, so just to get back to a smaller point, I don't know if I really go for this whole like here you have not slurred, and then here you have separated, and here you have separated and you have slurred, right? So I feel like you have to have a bit more consistency in the way that things are phrased, so as to not distract too much from from the way things work and are expressed, because this is going so fast, allegro vivace, it is just ripping through here, so that you just really don't have time to underline those kinds of subtleties, right? So for instance here, this should be slurred in the bassoon, right, in first bassoon. So I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time talking about it, but I just feel like it's just something that's food for thought on your next effort, okay? So bum 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 dun 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 dun. It's interesting, like we're in F major here, and you have inverted some of these intervals and so on, and sort of spread them out across like the landscape, I think that it's the only thing I would say is like watch out for making like for stacking things quite so regularly. Do you know what I mean? I think that there's room for you to get a little bit more complex in your texture, and we will in your harmonic texture and your voicing. So we'll sort of judge that as we look at reiterations, recapitulations of this theme, which I think there are like 4 or 5. All right. Bum, ba, da, dun, dun, dun. So yeah, so it's like here you're just doing loud, soft in strings with a little bit of bassoons at the beginning, and then here you answer with winds. Da da da, ba ba da dun dun dun. I'm a little worried about this top line in the flutes, but the only saving grace here is that it'll get absorbed by your first violins. However, that sets up a situation here where the oboe will speak out, and then this middle line may even actually be stronger, right, between the octaves, in which case you're losing the sense of curve, right? Could it not have been maybe a possibility here that the first violins might have played an octave here just to double that top line, and then then the drop down here is it works in terms of like being a subtle answer, right? So it's just a question of like whether or not people are fixated on the relationship of this F having to be higher than the E flat on top, right? Okay. Da, 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 da. Yeah, so I think if you're going to go da, 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 you should go, da, da. And here, da. I'm not convinced by da, da, da. I think da, 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 da. Or even da, 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 da. You could drop the slur altogether. But I see what you're doing here. You're going up, down, So, yeah, acceptable. But here, like, I think it should be uniform in terms of the phrasing, just so that it really we're not distracted by little subtle differences between parts, that it just really has a kind of integrity to it. Okay, but like all that aside, I think that this works pretty well. Okay, now here you're using symbol, like you're using a suspended symbol. All right, so that's something that's not really, like in terms of Beethoven being symphonic. That's something. Is that? Um, that's not like the most common thing. I'm trying to think of an example of symbols not as pairs in Beethoven's symphonic works, like going, and in his orchestral works in general. So yeah, so this sort of boosh boosh kind of thing is pretty atypical. So so if you're, that would be like going against the style. Now, as far as everything else is concerned, I would say that like a lot of this is very much open open pitches rather than stopped pitches. And the occasional stopped pitch is totally fine. I threw in some myself in my natural horn scoring. But just like if you find yourself just using a fully chromatic range all the time, then maybe you should just think of it as a more modern interpretation and just use F horns, right? A pair of F horns. Okay, so right here, I have a little question in my evaluation criteria, and I'm sure nobody's going to do this like I did, but if you listen to Spencer play it, and several other pianists, by the way, there is just a slight meno right here, just a slight slowing down, just a sort of like it's Beethoven thinking, right? So here he's going da da dum ba ba da 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 ba 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 da ba bum da da da. And he just goes off on a tear, right? So it's almost like he's pulling back slightly, and then he just smashes into the audience with this with kind of key breaking virtuosity, right? Just almost rattling it off like a touch typist, right? So that's why I think maybe just really listening to the performers and seeing like where do they, where are their little stresses and nuances of tempo as well as expression and dynamics and so on. Right. But I mean, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, right? Da, 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 ba, ba, da, 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 da. I'm noticing like how much you're using kind of bassoons just as a way of thickening up your lower strings and so on. I almost wonder whether or not the second violin part here could have been doubled in violas, and then just kind of leading to this, just putting the violas right in the same position so that they're not starting cold right on the downbeat of this bar. They're engaged already. Right, and then here we've got like a very cool little transcription. You've got the left hand, just kind of walking around doing its little kind of walking bass sort of a thing here. And you've got the dynamic pushes, right? Jumping back, piano subito, push forward to forte. And I have a little question in the there are two concerns here. Is this going to be smooth rather than awkward? Are you going to have some kind of textural and dynamic expansion? Okay, and is your repeat going to feel inevitable and not just a replay, right? And then on top of that, do we maintain the nervous energy throughout? So let's talk about how this checks those boxes, right? Now here, I really like the way that you split this up. da 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 da, and you have the other part going dun da da dun da da dun da da dun da da, and it is exactly, it is very a very nice way to do it. Yeah. Well, one thing is like the piano subito, like right in the middle of the slur, is a little strange. I think maybe starting the piano subito on the half beat is maybe a little easier on the player, just mentally, because here you're having the piano subito happen like in the middle of this staccato eighth note, right? So it's just really try to put it like right under the half beat, I think. Now, you've got the emphasis of the pitch amongst the patterning in your clarinet, which I think is very cool. And then we've got this kind of almost like exaltation here in octaves with the first flute. And I just feel like, I really like this punctuation in here. I wish that it continued on. I mean, like maybe like in oboes or something like that. But I mean, I totally get where you're coming from with this, and just like a little pushing here in horn. So I think all of this works really nicely. And just a little bit of thumping around in timpani and so on. Yeah. This sort of caught me by surprise here a little bit. The this brum kind of thing. Yeah. So I mean, I think that you could have continued this kind of trading off of the pattern, and not really relied on the violas to be like brilliant virtuosos, right? I think that like even like splitting the violas divisi into two separate staves here and having them emulate what's going on an octave higher, I think would be easier on them, right? And then the same thing here. There's like here you do like the dovetailing, and then here you don't. And I almost feel like you could have continued on the dovetailing till here and then not dovetailed here, and just really had like maybe even a little bit more force here at the end. All right, horns are all cool right in there. All right, and now we're getting to the whole question of a direct transcription, right? Might prove impractical, especially with transposing to more negotiable key signature. Does interlocking, interdependent scoring between orchestral sections support headlong momentum, but with precision and clarity? Right? Choice of instruments dependent on where a passage is positioned between other passages, or dependent on dynamics or direction of line up and down, and so on. How do these sections lead back to the other sections dramatically? All right, so we're going to focus on all of that now. But there is one little issue, and that is there's a kind of a momentary pause here, in a lot of so there's just a tiny bit of a placement of the half beat here, just because like the pianist just needs to sort of jump their hands towards the middle, and they also want to kind of let the force here kind of to complete its idea, even rather than kind of washing into the next thing here, and without forcing it to be too staccato. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so that's a possible thing you could do, is put a little pausa here, right? But then that messes up your little sort of reverse, your diminuendo roll right in here. Right? Okay. And then this is lovely right in here, this sort of pluck, 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 pluck. And this is really useful for keeping your string players on the beat. Yeah, and then yeah, and this is great, having them dovetail on the beat. That's really nice. Now, one thing you might want to do, like in a situation like this, you could dovetail on the half beat, and then just like that way, da 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 da, and then like maybe not even maybe not even dovetail, just da 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 da. Yeah, rather than having to go da 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 da. I mean, that's all perfectly possible, though. And then here you're just like really using the string section completely by itself, right? So, does this lead to the next section dramatically? I mean, it's more kind of like it does set up this as a surprise better, right? Right, and then just some pianists choose to put a tiny bit of a pausa here at the end of this, right? Just so that it's kind of like, what's going on? Bam, dun dun, right? So that's another place where you could put in a pausa, just like right here, just a little bit. So this is placed, right? And it's also a really great way of getting everybody's attention, rather than the conductor just, doink, 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 preparation, bum, 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 right? Yeah, but I mean, there's nothing about this that is unworkable. I mean, and it's another reason why I chafe at at the inability of this of your application's sound set to express what needs to be expressed. So I would just say, don't wait around for Note Performer to get its act together and give you a good sound set. Just go and do something to get a better sound. And it's not because I think that you deserve, or I think that you have to give me mock-ups that sound more realistic as a matter of principle. It's because of your career as an orchestrator. If you start working with, say, choreographers, with production people, theatrical stuff, and even just sometimes getting a concert, like a concert music commission. Sometimes the people pulling the strings and making the funding do not know how to read a score, or do not know how to read a score that well, as you and I. So they want to hear a mock-up, and they might want to hear a mock-up even if they can read a score really well, because they want to know if what just like me looking at these entries, they want to know if like your imagination matches up with your ability to score things if they don't know you. Right, so for all of those reasons, good, decent sounding, not good, but decent sounding mock-ups are becoming more and more important. So it just puts the pressure on situations like this where they shouldn't feel like they've done enough, right? They should be constantly trying to improve. Now, this is 2 years ago, and another one of my participants was actually musing, hey, I totally agree with you about the the sort of choppiness, the not very good Muse sounds mock-up. But like they thought, well, maybe things sound better now 2 years later. So, maybe everything I'm saying here just is completely irrelevant. This is quite a ways up to sort of push the cellos at this huge speed. But it's doable, but I would want it to be in tenor clef. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay. I almost wonder if there's some way that you could have had had violas a little bit more involved here. Maybe even like Divisi violas rather than, I mean, and having said that, cellists can eat this for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's just, which cellists, right? If you're going to work with a university or semi-pro or community orchestra, you might not get the best results. Okay, so I'm not going to muse on that too long. So now here's the fun part. We have really looked at this opening. In extreme detail. Now we're going to jump between parts. All right. So let's jump back to double A and look at how you orchestrated this. Right. So strings with a little help from the bassoons, answered by these octaves, and then strings with more of a wind sound, answered by the winds. Right. And then just strings, dum bum ba dum bum bum. Right, so we're just gonna look at this much, right? Going on to bar 32. All right. So here we go. it's very similar to, you've got these stacks of sixths and everything else, but now you've got trombones involved, which is very cool. And you're just using them for a teeny bit of color, right? Because you're starting piano and diminuendo to pianissimo and so on. And once again, I just feel like it's going to feel choppy if it's not slurred, right? Or like having different qualities of articulation, slurs in the winds and not in slurs in the strings and not in the winds and brass and things like that. Like you're going a mile a minute with this piece. Like try to make things much more unified, and it'll help the players relate to each other. Right. So that's the same thing here. Like you've got a slur on your dotted rhythm here, but not in the violas. I'm having a problem just instantly recognizing things because of the way that you left out the like you didn't have a single bar line across all your strings. So you see if you can fix things like that, before you send me these scores. If they're easy, if you can't fix it, or you see no way of fixing it, then that's fine. But if there's something you just like with Sibelius, all you do is just sort of grab the bottom of the bar line and you just drag it down, and then then that's global for the entire score. So just see if you can make the score a little bit more uniform. All right, so and then dun, 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 dun. This is interesting. Like you are instead of having divisi octaves, you're having like single notes in the strings, which I feel is actually much, much stronger. And then like the clarinets, sort of lower winds in the middle, holding things together. It's interesting, like having bassoon come in under this. You're not telling us who this bassoonist is. Right? Is this number one, number two? Is it both of them? Right? Try to mark your like entrances and changes from first voice to second voice, or from intervals to single lines a little bit better. Okay, just for your own practice. It doesn't really matter what I think, and to have a uniform slurring kind of a pattern in everything for this. All right. So you are changing things up a little bit, right? And then da 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 bum bum ba bum bum. So this is very, very similar to what happened before. A bit more with the trombones, and I think there's a bit more, like there is some kind of middle strings happening right in here. Was there horn? Yeah, there was just a touch of horn here, right? So you've added a bit more horn, but you've taken it out there because you have your trombones to help out, right? So that all makes sense. So you're varying things a little bit. So it's interesting that we will analyze this up against the other against the other part again, all right? But it's just how does this set up something new here, right? Well, we'll analyze that when we get to it. So that is 89. So now let's jump up forward to the double E, right here at bar 89, right? So this is interesting. We're coming off of these like very chirpy doubled notes in upper strings and upper winds, right? And then here you come in with this kind of much more earthy bum bum bum. I mean, it's still got the scope in the strings, right? But you've got you got way more involved here in terms of your horns, trumpets, and lower winds. Now, it pretty much your trumpet parts are just basically chromatic trumpets, right? Because like the natural trumpet player isn't. I mean, they could reach their hand into the bell and like change that into an A flat or change it with lip pressure or whatever. But that's like not. You shouldn't score for natural trumpet like that. You should just really try to. Like the notes that are changed with lip pressure should be above C, right, in the middle of the staff, right? And then even then, you should try to avoid too much of that, right? So let's just say, you're really scoring with natural, with chromatic brass. And here, like you're throwing in this high C, and this is going to scream. Do you know what I mean? This is It's really going to be loud. And you have that same note here in the C trumpet. So I just do not see any need for you to double that in your F horns. I mean, it would be better if you were to to spread across the harmony that's in the C trumpet part and just have like a single trumpet or maybe a duet trumpets there. Right? So yeah. Yeah. Ba, ba, bum. And then here you have like lower register answering strings. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, there's absolutely zero need ever in the entire world for you to put you don't need this, right? Unless you yourself are a string player and you are preparing this in a situation where there is zero time to do anything but sight read, or like say you're preparing a set of parts for like a show that is touring around where there's one rehearsal, right? Like Les Mis or Cats or something like that. You just do not need to supply parts or score with string with up bow, down bow marks. Okay, so just leave them out. There's nothing about this like if the players want to end on a down bow, they'll give it 2 up bows here, right? They don't need the mark. And then da da da. This is not too different from what was before. Only you're like adding trumpet now, right? So I almost feel like, yeah, da da da. So here the trumpet is complementary to your upper winds, right? And you don't need as much involved here in the strings. There's some very wise stuff going on in here, Frank. Then bum bum ba da bum bum, and I love this, like lower strings and lower winds. Right, and then here, absolutely, I would want to put a mano in. Just, like the way that you've got the clarinets and flutes stacked, a little oboe in the middle, and a little bit of tish on these cymbals. Da, da, da. And then odd tempo. Bum, ba, da, dun, dun, da, all right, and we will talk about how this all relates. I would say, just kind of looking at it, we'll look at it a little bit more. If it seems to me as if your flutes just kind of drop off the edge of the universe here, and everything kind of chugs along in these lower instruments, and that just feels a little unnatural to me. Maybe it would be better if you just cut the upper winds here. So bum bum bum, and then answer with lower winds, dun 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 bum ba da 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 da, and have all these guys come in. Maybe even adding a little bit of lower strings in here so that it's an integrated sound pushing into there. But I do like the kind of element of surprise too. So if you feel like falling off the cliff works for you, and then the strings coming in suddenly, then that's if that's what you need to do, then stick with it. Okay, all right. So now let's look at let's look at bar 150. All right, just after all these things. Okay, and this is after a very, very long extended, and here I would absolutely go pause it here, and just a sudden breath, and then I love this horns, trombones, bassoons, right? This is really where the mock-up just died a horrible death, I feel. And especially, and then right in here, I was just inwardly sobbing at how, your great ideas weren't being served very well. So, sorry, I don't want to harp on it too much. I don't want to make you feel guilty about it. You did fine. Okay, so just once again, I think you should just have a pair of F horns. Okay, I think that's all you need. I just feel it would be great if you could get an orchestra to play this. So my recommendation is just to go back over this. Don't have a C basso horn, just have 2 pairs of F horns, and then make sure that they interlock on any have interlocking harmony on any chords, and that that the rolls of the third and the first are correct, and the rolls of the first and the second are correct, and so on. Okay, that would be my recommendation with this, because I think you should try to get this played. All right. All right. So, and then this is taken right from the beginning. Dun, 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 dun. And then yeah, and here you have like a full tutti, ba ba ba, dun, 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 and then once again, absolutely have a meno here. Da da da, a tempo, bum 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 bum, da 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 da, and we'll look at this more. This is kind of its own. The coda is really more of its own thing, and so we'll look at that. And I love this horn right in here, and you set it up so beautifully the bar before. So I mean, great work. All right, so now let's jump back to the parts which follow these statements, right? So we already looked at the first one. This one. I really like this little punctuation here of the clarinet and the way that you did the trading off. I recommended that you kept the trading off going till here and then maybe give it a little bit of extra push, right? And to not have virtuoso viola parts. Make this, you could have this divided into two separate staves in the part and have the players trade off exactly as they do here. And I think that would be a much, much stronger approach. All right. Okay, so okay, so what were the criteria? Smooth, not awkward, maintaining nervous energy, ending phrase with finality, framing the next part, textural and dynamic expansion, which it's not really. I mean, there's little. There's more here, but it's not really. You're not thinking that way, and that's all right. And then is the repeated part inevitable, not just replayed? And I would think that it feels more inevitable because you change things around, especially in the flute and so on and so forth. So everybody just take a mental photograph of this, right? And we're going to jump forward to bar 43. Oops, we went a little far. Okay. Right, and then we have the same thing as before, right? We've got the first bassoon and the cellos and everything else, and just pretty much reusing material here, right? Right. Yeah, and just same comments as before. Try to keep the trading off going in the strings as much as you can, and add that to the violas. Just divisi violas, dovetailing. And then I really love the way that you wrap this up, though. This is a different wrap up, and for different reasons, and it works really, really great. And just looking at the horn parts here, this should just be chromatic F horns and C trumpet, right? So I don't, I feel that there is a spirit of that. You have a period spirit, but you don't really have a period execution, right? There's a lot of stuff in here that, and to be completely frank about it, this exercise, first movement and second movement, is completely alien to the period, right? Nobody back there was taking sonatas and orchestrating them and asking people to send in their best orchestrations, or at least that I'm aware of, and then sending them back letters saying, bar 40 was pretty good, bar 36, you need a little work on your horns. Nobody was, to my knowledge, nobody was doing that. So, to an extent, I can't really say, oh, well, that isn't period, because it's or this is period, because it, that they were cooking, they weren't cooking with gas back then. They were, cooking with peat and coal and, and wood. So, yeah. Yeah, and I think that you could put some accents in here, right? Just to really just bum, 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 bum. I think that would really underline that, right? So, but we'll talk about how it goes into the next section. Okay, so now let's jump ahead to bar 100. All right, what we were just looking at. That, remember I felt that the handoff was a little abrupt. Okay, but I mean, we have a lot of instruments in similar functions, and so my cautions to you are the same: more trading off, and then don't depend on virtuoso violists. Just have them interlock their parts the same exact way as your first and second violinist, and you can do the trading off all over the place, and you can hold off on any of this unison stuff until you get really down here towards the end, right? Now this right in here, these 3 bars, I think that they're acceptable for the first, but I wouldn't do it with the violas. I would wait until maybe right here. Okay. Okay, so you have a slightly different approach. I mean, we still have the we still have the horns, right? Kind of making comments here. We have something similar happening here with the staccato clarinet, and then the going to octaves here. But I really like these oboes. This feels Beethoven-like to me. And then the flutes dancing around up on top. I felt that I was really strong, and once again, mock-up did you no favors there. And then, but like here, I just think that you should really, really lean on the last bar and, pushing forwards, dun, 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 right? Just really, really emphasize it. Okay. All right, so let's jump back. Now we're going to talk about the little flyaway parts, the little kind of improvisatory bits, right? So we already talked about this, just like how strong this was in terms of, just really being able to dovetail like on the beat and everything else. And by the way, the dovetailing, just always dovetail on the same value note. And just imagine all of these being slightly sticky, and this, D sharp, for instance, kind of spending a little too much time in the sound picture of what the second violinists are doing, and then this F sharp spending a little too much time in the sound picture of what the first violinists are doing and everything else. So unless this was a staccato, maybe, I would say just end on a 16th note so that everything is just absolutely seamless, right? Unless that is a specific thing that you intend, but I'm seeing it happen in so many different scores of dovetailing with, a longer value, like even quarter notes in one score. All right, so I felt that this was pretty strong, and then like this kind of like things kind of breaking up and fragmenting and so on, right? And a bit of staccato. Sorry, pizzicato, I meant to say, in the double basses, right? And then setting up the restatement. Okay, so I felt that this was pretty strong. Now jumping ahead to oh, geez, you know what? I am looking at the wrong screen. Yeah, okay. Okay, so at 51 is where I want to be. So here's that part where I felt that you should do the staccatos, and I really liked the syncopation here. I think the syncopation is almost like, I mean, I wish that I would see that in the first, second horn and the trumpets. Ba 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 ba, right? You know what I'm saying? All right, and then here we have this sort of reverse. And I would have a beam going across, like a beam covering the rest, just like for the convenience of the player. So they're going dun da 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 da, and it's just easier for them to read. And then die. So this is all just beautifully well scored. Like there's nothing wrong with it at all. You have a nice trade-off here on the F while the flute is still strong to the oboe, and then the oboe not getting too low, right? And like if it is getting low enough to get diminuendo, then like you don't want to take it any lower than E or D, right? And then same thing here. The really good trade-off part, if this is, if you had a trade-off here, then at the end of the bar here is also a really good subtle place to do it, and not on top of each other where the bassoon is weaker, like if you were to have the bassoonist trade-off with the clarinet here. Just like it's better on the D and then descending downwards. And then, this is all just perfectly capable of being played. It's really nice. And I just love this little bit of little bit of horn right in here. It's, you know what, I would almost say that I'd rather have you have first and second horn playing these octaves rather than first and third horn, right? You know, because that's one of the things that the first and second do really, really well. They do better, like first and second and third and fourth. They do octaves way better together, in my experience, than first and third. That is not to say that first and third could not play a perfectly beautiful functional octave together, but it's less natural to them, right? It's less instinctive. They just like always try to go with the more instinctive thing. Did you forget to put a pizzicato here? Okay, but anyways, I really love the, you know, I mean, if it were pizzicato, I think it would work a whole lot better with the, just with the way everything is descending right in here, and then just adding a little bit of second violin and cello here, also dovetailing. Now here, I think that dovetailing is less necessary in the cellos and just and second violins, at least just for these two bars. It could just be all the violins and cellos going down, 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 because it's like it's pretty basic, right? Okay, and like we have totally not looked at these big. Don't worry, we will get to them. All right. So now let's jump ahead to bar 74. Okay. So, you know, here's that. So we're ending on this crunch, and then and this is once again all pretty strong. You're doing octaves. So it's just like, I mean, it just depends on if you really want that real huge fat Russian sound here, right? Because like Beethoven doesn't feel the need to do octaves, does he? Right? He just has that single line descending upwards. So you just have to accept, if you're going to have this kind of weight, this huge fatness, which just gets bigger and bigger and higher, you know, when you have the drop off here to this subtler, more empty kind of space, you know, are you going to be, you know, is your intention to underline the just, you know, the kind of free falling nature of it, when that was actually Beethoven's intention back here? He wanted a massive crunching chord with his piano and then just little notes fluttering around, right? So yeah, so you just have to judge whether or not that, you know, delaying the you know, the sense of empty space is the right thing to do here, right? But, you know, having said that, there's like nothing wrong here, right? There's nothing that is not playable. And I love the pizzicato in here. This is all great. Yeah, and then just like using flute and a little bit of second violin and so on. Yeah. Yep. You almost think that like dovetailing, like if you had dovetailed to the B here, the B flat here, and then had the second violin play this part and then dovetailed on the C, I think it would just be way easier on the players than the way that you got it set up right now. Just much more, you know, much easier in a sight reading situation. So that's my recommendation of fixing that up. Now, keep in mind here that this you know, this kind of, you know, inane is the wrong way of putting it. I mean, but it's just kind of like very playfully, you know, just fragmenting apart. The sense of just really getting fragmented and wispier and wispier it's going to be harder to convey that when you have so much doubling, right? So I can see it here in this section, especially following this kind of earthy, very gutsy kind of octaves right in here. But like, you know, I feel that this should be like tissue paper thin right here, you know, or like it should be thin like the way that you see, yeah, like the kind of paper that they use like to in gift bags, you know, that kind of tissue paper, right? They just really, just the very, very light, dry, you know, like onion skin paper. It should just be just incredibly light here. So yeah, so just watch out for that. All right. And of course you're only doing 3 bars completely in free fall here. and it's going to be tough for the players, but they can do it. But it's going to take practice, anyways. But yeah, and then of course I would try to put a little pausa here, bum bum bum, just a teeny bit of a breath, I think, rather than bum bum bum. You know what I mean? I just feel like there needs to be a little bit more, just a teeny bit of space there. Okay. All right. So that was bar 74. Now let's jump forward to 110. Right. And then here, like, you're kind of doing that same reversal that you did before, coming off of the, that same basic section. And, that's my comments, same as before. I think it all works pretty good in the way that you got it here. You got the horn octaves and everything else, right? So no problems there. Now let's jump ahead to bar 133, and this is one of the most powerful arguments I can possibly think of putting a pausa after the big massive chord and then going into the little diddle 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 diddle, is because Beethoven actually scores one right into it, right? And if you listen to pianists, they have a tendency to just leave a slight pause there, just because it's easier to jump around and negotiate and get into the right position and everything else. If they just make it a dramatic pause, just a tiny bit of a dramatic pause, then that gives them the time that they need to get there, and it makes it seem as if it's intentional rather than compulsory, right? Here you've got fermatas under your bassoon and bass trombone. A fermata applies to everybody or to nobody. All right? If you just intend this to last longer, then make it a dotted eighth. If you intend for the rhythmic duration to be longer, then it should all be fermata in every part, right? Okay. Now, but why are we here? We're here for this. Yeah, and that, and I think, like, once again, you have these interlocking parts, and I think that the way that you've scored it, bassoon, a little bit of bassoon helping out, clarinet, and so on, and then just kind of getting down to this really soft, just all strings kind of a texture, I think works great. I put in a diminuendo here, right, with these parts, so that it sort of subsumes into the texture of the strings, and I wouldn't take away this, you're putting this part right in here, right, into a kind of a doubling relationship with the violas. So I think that this needs to continue to carry forwards, right? Like, you're sort of trying to bridge this gap with just these clarinets, but I don't think that that's going to work texturally. I think that, like, the sudden absence of the violas is going to be more, it's going to be something that the listener notices a little too much, I think. Yeah, and then this is all really cool. I almost feel like you just need some kind of note here, right? Whether it's just this this B flat, bum da da dun da da dun da da dun da da dun da da dun, right? And of course, just as I recommended before, in all these instances, close the beam, right? Just have the beam, but the rest over it. Yep. Yeah, and this is very, very cool, right? And here, yeah, like with this, I would just have the oboist play this E here. Yeah, and then just like 2 bars, just, I think this works really, really nice. And then a little bit of a pause there. Or no, yeah. And then and you might not even need this note here in your first flute. Okay, wow. All right, so there are 2 more things to analyze, and they're actually both pretty big sections. Actually, 3 more things to analyze. And they are the big expansive passages. The first one starting at bar 57 here. Boom. Right? That part. Yeah, so this is just obviously copy paste error here. Don't need an extra fortissimo. I don't think too much of this being an octave higher. Do you know what I mean? I mean, why, right? You just really don't. I think it takes away from the kind of the curve of the line going upwards. Like you're starting higher to begin with, right? And then the same thing here. But just that doesn't turn me on. I think you're better off just being in unison with your second violins here. Because and it also distracts from the way that everything is melting down to this lower point. So if you don't start from there, if you're suddenly starting bigger and then smaller, I think you're taking away from the beautiful curve of the line that would otherwise be there. I do like this drop right in here. That's very cool. I mean, there's no reason why that couldn't, like here you're dropping the clarinets, right? And here you have a trade-off here to flute. Why couldn't you go to why couldn't there be like support on these notes in here in your like maybe second clarinet could go to the octave here, and then you could go back to unison or something like that. Yeah. And I like the way that you just really fill this in, right? And that's consistency of strength rising through instrumental registers, right? So like that, you absolutely do that. That's really, really nice, right? And you don't push your oboes and bassoons too high, right? You kind of stay right in here, and then you let like C trumpets kind of take over in terms of filling in this gap right in here, and then of course the horns pushing forwards fills in for what's going on in the bassoons. Very clever, About the only thing is like, I mean, is there somebody around who can help out this poor guy down here, this poor violist? But it's really not needed. Yeah, and then just the little worrying doubts. Yeah, and this is totally fine. I almost wonder whether or not going to just like a slurring by the beam group would work just as well here, rather than just the I kind of slurring. Yeah, and this is cool. I would say just really make sure. I would almost want your see, this is going down to pianissimo, right? I would almost want the brass to be pianissimo here. This will be considered pianissimo by your trombonist, and maybe pianissimo there, and then everybody should crescendo, right? Right to this, right, and then it's just the same thing again. Yeah, and then this is kind of cool. The bass drum there, right, and then we've got this. Yeah, that works fine. Yeah. Right, and then you drop down here, so that's good. There was at least one or two where the orchestrator forgot to drop back down again. Make sure you mark all of your instruments piano here. Yeah, and this is just fun. These little pops right in here. That's all fine. Yeah. Yeah, and then pushing here on the brass. See, it's such a shame that the mock-up didn't express this better. Yeah, and then this just kind of the same repeat. And then just as I mentioned before in some other sections, I think accenting, right? And then, yeah. And I wonder if this could be a tuned pitch here, right? Just like, if you're going to have chromatic horns and brass, you could have chromatic timpani, and maybe you don't even need a bass drum then, right? Okay, let's jump ahead to bar 116. Okay, and then you have a very similar approach, and my just same exact comments. Yeah, I mean there's some great stuff in here. Yeah, but and then this all works fine. Yep, but accents, right? Pow. Yeah, so no big issues there that I can see, really. So now let's go to the coda, right? This is so great. I feel so energizing, just to finally dig into these movement 2 evaluations, and it's keeping me fresh to just not have it be nothing but movement 1. Okay. So we had kind of gotten to this point, and I had remarked, I just really love the way that it's lower strings. It's kind of interesting how you've got you have just a sort of a stretch here of unaccompanied bassoon, but I just have to warn you because of like you do this in a couple of spots. You have a fairly heavy strings being accompanied by one wind instrument. You did this somewhere else too, and then you drop the winds out and you have you drop the strings out and you just have the wind instrument playing. And I feel that it's a place where I would say, okay, so make this piano solo, or make it piano just having some way of underlining the character that it was doing something independently, right? Because otherwise it'll just like the player will be sort of like, oh geez, well, where'd the strings go, right? It's not so much like, oh bum ba da 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 da, right? They don't really have that. You have to indicate that they have independent agency, or else it's just wasted. And then you have to ask yourself, is that independent agency justified? And am I really are they really pulling their weight there, right? Is it enough? But one way or another, you need to, if everybody's pianissimo, but then this has to be a featured line with a drop out of the strings, is got to be like piano solo, right? And then you can go back to pianissimo here. And yeah, and then just bringing in that color. Dun, 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 bum, ba, dun, dun, dun. Yeah, and then this is all really cool. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, I love the way this expands out, and you've got your brass kind of going woof, woof, woof. Right? Or okay, all right. So this reminds me. All right, silly anecdote time. I had a dog who didn't this is how he barked. Right? He wouldn't just go ruff ruff. So he would groan and then he would bark. So this reminds me of. That's great. Yeah, that's very cool. You could possibly even put like tenuto at the beginning of each slur. So you get that kind of long bow sort of push at the beginning, but of course not everything being tenuto, but just having just saying, okay, this bow is going to be kind of tenuto throughout, like the way the motion of the bow is going to be tenuto, not necessarily all of the notes separately. Yeah, and I just love this da 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 dun da da dum bum bum. All right, and here I feel this almost should be accented tremolo. So or maybe like sforzando piano, right? Just because I just feel that this is so we're we're decreasing and decreasing and decreasing, and then this just feels like so much of an afterthought. It doesn't really have any oomph. And like you might be thinking, well, Thomas, but everything is decreasing, so shouldn't this be really subtle? Yes, but it still needs a little oomph. Okay? All right, and then here... Yeah. Yeah. I'm not totally convinced by this. I almost feel like this should be in, I mean, if there was a way of separating this out into different staves or something. I mean that's all readable. You occasionally see like Mahler parts or Strauss parts or something like that where the divisi gets like really psychotic like that. But yeah, I'm just a little not too convinced by that. And there's another thing too is like poco ritardando. Are you establishing a particular tempo here? What is that tempo? How fast is it? I think the conductor needs to know all of that. Right? And then is there a fermata here on this rest? Is there maybe a bit of a fermata on the destination note? All right. All right, and then just like the kind of the hell bent for leather. Yeah, and I almost feel like the last, maybe these could like be not slurred. Yeah. Yeah, there's just something about this ending. I just feel it's like it's a lot. I mean, it's playable for really, really good players. Like all of these slurs. Like you've got no dovetailing, you've got no nothing, right? I would say if you think that you're going to be working with players who are a little, a little behind the curve, I would rewrite this. Absolutely, make it way simpler, and I would maybe do dovetailing kind of things between the two clarinets and between the, maybe between different players. Okay. Otherwise, no huge problems with this. Okay. Big. Here's a place where big fat high C, high written C is totally fine. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, look at how almost non-functional the trumpets are, right? They're just doing these little boops and beeps. Maybe this could be rewritten a little bit, right? Okay, so those are my thoughts on this entry, and I really liked it, Frank. Yeah, sure, I picked it to bits, and I made a bunch of nagging complaints about the mock-up and everything else, but I think you did a great job here. And so if I've been complaining about the mock-up, it's because I'm on your side. It's not because I'm getting on your case. All right. So yeah, so this is a great way to start this little half dozen set of dotted brev movement 2 orchestrations here at the end of the enormous group. I thought it was 26, but it's 24, but that's still a huge amount, right? So anyway, but we're making it through, and I seem to have the same amount of energy as I did at the beginning, and same enthusiasm. So let's keep it strong. Let's keep the comments strong. I think Frank would really appreciate everybody jumping in and letting him know what they feel below. And Frank, like if you have time to take a look at some of the other entries, like particularly these last 6, like where everybody's orchestrating the same material, it'd be really, really great. So thanks everybody. Thank you, Frank, for giving me the time I needed to get over my health problems and come back to this. I hope it's not too late to be useful, and I just really appreciate the patience. And I haven't had one disappointed word from anybody, and that's a miracle. Do you know what I mean? I so appreciate you guys being so patient and kind with me. So join me tomorrow for the next one of these very, very cool Movement 2 orchestrations.